Good afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's enjoying their conference. There were more sessions I wanted to see than were possible, so I'm excited to see them afterwards, but I'm happy folks are coming to this one. If anyone's curious about what we're talking about, has any questions, let me know. I think for these first few minutes, the microphones are hot. In fact, if you tell me what you do and what you're interested, I'll even customize the content of what I talk about to fit your needs. So if you're a site builder, if you're a back-end dev, a front-end dev, wherever you fit in the silo, I'd love to hear about it.
I can start off. I'm Pete. I'm a backend dev. I fully believe in customizing everything you can in Drupal as a developer, but that's my stance.
That sounds like a real charge. Does that mean starting from scratch PHP or using Drupal APIs to customize things?
Oh, as much Drupal APIs, yeah. Not completely starting from scratch, but just overall, trying to create a good admin experience, a good, data structure, all that kind of stuff.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to say hello? Maybe tell us what your role is or how you fit into this topic. And it's okay because it's a long day. It's a lot of webinars. I didn't realize that an online conference can be just as exhausting as an in-person. With that, I'm gonna kick things off. Just to double check, is there anything I need to do? It says recording. I think I'm ready.
Nope, you're free to go. I'm gonna mute the mics for now, and then I'll mute them a bit towards the end, okay? And then I'll send you a 30-minute reminder. Okay, thank you.
Much appreciated. I'll get my tool. All right, well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Empowering Site Owners by Developing Custom Views Plugins. We're here to talk about Drupal Views, the core module that builds and renders content queries, benefits of extending views through custom plugins. This presentation has 3 sections, and we're going to start by discussing the evolving roles of site builders, and then we're going to look at the basics of Drupal Views, but finally we're going to get into that advanced problem set where we need custom queries, subqueries, expressions, and joins to teach views new tricks. So if it seems like it's starting slow, it's going to sprint in no time. I hope you leave this session feeling empowered to use views even when developing complex features, and that you're just ready to build workflows that your site builders have this sort of inclusive builder environment for all experiences. Yeah, inclusive experiences. That's what I'm trying to say. My name is Jim Vomero, and I'm a senior engineer at 4 Kitchens. 10 years experience in Drupal, and I use the framework for all my nerdy hobbies, including running calculations for brewing beer, planning my retro arcade projects, and even teaching kids to prepare for the zombie apocalypse at Philadelphia area summer camps. If you have any questions after this presentation, please reach out. I'm always excited to talk shop, and I'd love to keep this conversation going. I'm a web chef at 4 Kitchens, and we build apps for organizations that depend on large scale or unconventional content. We work with associations, publishers, enterprise in media, and I particularly work a lot with higher ed. And we build big websites. Now, I'm sure a number of people in this room and at this conference have won the badge of webmaster at some point in their career. The job was often a catch-all for every aspect of web design, development, DevOps, marketing, communications, you name it. You were a Department of One, and you were probably responsible for your entire company's digital presence. And even today, if you wear too many hats, organizations are shifting these responsibilities. There's a lot more attention and resources to our web channels. Websites are no longer novelties. They've become sophisticated platforms for customer engagement. And with all this rapid change, it can feel a little unsettling for those of us that have to support the underlying technologies. Life maybe seemed easier, or at least more stable, when only one person was able to make decisions and changes to a website. So let's go in the Wayback Machine and travel to the mid-90s. Static sites were all the rage again then, but it's because there was no other option. HTML was manually created in your editor of choice, maybe Notepad or VI, and your deployments were super manual. Someone needed to make a change, they called the webmaster. And as the web became more important to your organization, you got more and more calls, and your IT person became a real bottleneck. You know, your tech gurus were copying and pasting content from emails, or maybe opening an attachment that has a Microsoft Publisher document in it that has an image, and you got to copy out the JPEG. All your users were becoming more tech savvy. They were learning from FrontPage and Adobe PageMill, Netscape Communicator, and they were asking for FTP access to your server, which scared us. You know, we weren't ready for that type of collaboration. Looking ahead, things got a little more advanced. Server-side includes and iframes were important for keeping components locked down, and relational databases became more important for separating content design, and we started building these homebrewed CMSs. We had a lot of dashboards that were just a colorful wild west of icons and interfaces. And our content owners started to have the ability to log in and maybe use tools like FCK Editor to manage content. Of course, this new level of access brought new challenges. So you had inline CSS being pasted in, and clunky markup from Microsoft Word getting pasted, or broken HTML tags that would just ruin your layout. So we needed a way for our technologies to evolve to meet this daily need of our power users. And so we moved to the age of CMSs. We no longer have these static brochure sites, but interactive sites that are fresh and collaborative and relevant on a daily basis. And CMS has dominated the web for years now, whether you're talking WordPress or Joomla or Drupal, Plone, Red Dot, Mambo, Nuke. Oh, there were so many others, and I still have nightmares of them. These tools included libraries, though, that made our lives easier, or at least faster. And they were free alternatives for all this website administration work. They offered this up-to-date tool set, and they let us add users, change settings, permissions, all just with a click of a button. Now, not all of our problems were solved. It seemed that content owners always wanted just a little bit more access. Menus, modifying templates, organizing multimedia, creating dynamic lists. These are things you're probably still getting requests for and either saying no or having to say something like, oh, you want to change that thing in a sidebar? Well, that's not content, that's a view, or that's a template. Why don't you put in a JIRA ticket? I'll take it to the change management board. We have a monthly stakeholders meeting. It's a pain, it's a routine, and it's often us saying no when I really want to empower those people. So luckily to say, our CMSs are still evolving, and we will continue to find this balance between giving users access to content management tools and what is appropriate website governance for our teams. All right, this next section is going to get a little graphic, and I'm talking about GUIs, because we are in the middle of a codeless movement, and you could follow this genesis with a hashtag #NoCode on Twitter. It's really the convergence of maturing websites becoming more accessible and the expanding of public APIs, which has generated this whole new set of tools. And I expect a lot of developers are going to have to make a choice at parts of their career. Are you going to be the person who becomes an expert in using a tool, or the one writing the tool? And for me, I've already encountered integration tools like Zapier and IFT, or database replacements like Airtables, Smartsheets, Notion. And there's some really great no-code building apps I want to check out, like Webflow and Bubble. I hope you embrace these tools. They will never eliminate the need for a developer, but they may shift our responsibilities around to other parts of the dev stack. And really, we have to adapt because other software is evolving, making it easy and even fun to build web pages. So page builders are not just common, but they're expected in our marketing tools. I have a screenshot here from MailChimp, and I check MailChimp, Squarespace, Wix, and a number of the popular ones just to see what kind of no-code solutions are out there and how they're maturing. And it's not just limited to web page building. I use PHP Storm and now VS Code to streamline my dev processes. I use Circle CI, GitHub, and a plethora of other tools to automate my build chain. And while these are for highly technical operations, they're GUIs. And while everyone should know a little bit of VI, I see no reason to not use these new tools to keep us productive. We're on a similar path in Drupal. For years, panels, the module had a lot of power and could be overwhelming, but we've seen it mature along with the field API, and config management has a robust interface. Now we see the layout builder has become a reality for daily content management. There's a lot of promise in that project. I've used it a little, can't wait to do more with it. Our site builders are becoming more Drupal literate, and the roles of the people who work on our sites, they don't need to ask us to click a button for them. We should be able to give them the keys as long as there's the right workflow to support them. So really kicking off today's conversation, I want to say, as developers, we should want to step aside, and not be a bottleneck. And I want to empower the people in charge of their content. So for today, I've made a demo site, and I've created one that's experimenting with views as our GUI. And as a millennial, nostalgia is kind of a drug. So it's going to center around 90s movies that I saw growing up. All these examples are inspired by real client work just from the last year, and in particular for a project I did with a multimedia company that was streaming TV shows. Our demo site has 3 content types: movies, which is the core content; casts, which represent a role in a film. So a character in a film might be played by an actor or multiple people or 0 people. A person, which contains an actor, and the person has a role in a movie, and maybe multiple roles in a movie. And so the relationships are movies have cast members, have people. There's also 2 vocabularies: genres, which are our top level terms like action and comedy, and these are evergreen categories; and keywords, and these are free categories, probably temporary, used for a campaign, such as movies based on a book. Finally, there's the user entity, which comes with our standard Drupal install, and I've added a field called My List, which can have 0 or more movies, where a user's placing a movie on their watch list. All of today's data comes from the movie database API, and all my code is shared on GitHub, and I have the link on the last slide so you can explore it later. I'm not a designer, so if things look a little ugly, that's why. I'm just here to show views. Spectacular views at that. So views has played an important role in Drupal's story, and it allows site builders to fetch content from a Drupal database, represent that content as a collection of renderable entities and elements, and deliver that content through a variety of display mechanisms, all without writing a single line of code. Personally, I learned Drupal views before I understood how databases worked. I was learning the concepts of joining tables and traversing normalized versus denormalized content, and practical limits to filters, groups, and aggregation. I learned a lot of these principles before I knew them by name. To me, I was just working with my content types. And a lot of site builders are in a similar space, very familiar with Drupal's information architectures, but lacking that formal computer science jargon. So views is a wonderful place for site builders to start and create complex and dynamic displays. And while there is a learning curve, there's no shortage of training materials on the subject, and it's ultimately very low barriers of entry to get started with views. Now, the benefits of using views go hand in hand with the same reasons we use a CMS. There's a rich feature set. So caching controls, menu links, pagers, results, headers, footers, templates, settings for fields, configuration. All of these things are exhaustive to recreate from scratch. So you get those benefits. It's extensible with other modules on D.O. It's accessible to folks regardless of technical experience. It's consistent and portable. It stores and organizes configuration. And it's well supported in our community. And I feel confident that the views I make now will still be relevant in the next big versions of Drupal. Oh, and by the way, so my slides have some movies on the side here. Today's demo is all about creating collections of movies. So think of a Netflix or other streaming service that has movies given in categories. And so it's almost a little game for you to play at home, is what category do I have here? And so the category on the right is definitely entitled Totally Realistic Hacker Movies. Let's see if you guess the next ones. Now, I've been touting views like it's the best thing ever, but the truth is for most of my career, I tended to avoid them with a passion. And I think my reason is shared with a lot of other developers. First, I like to reinvent the wheel. When I have a problem, I want to find the leanest and most efficient solution to solve that problem. And using views can feel overly complicated and just generate a lot more steps than seems necessary. Second, I want my code to stay organized and clean and understandable. And views is not going to be the best place to add comments to organize any custom code. It's might be using some alter hooks to change things, but it's not necessarily connected to the view itself. You just need to know that there's an alter hook somewhere. And finally, we just may hit limits that Vue is not capable of doing out of the box. And that's largely what this presentation is about, although I hit all three of these. I know clients are always going to have special requests, and they're not going to know how the database or the content model works under the hood. And they shouldn't need to know. Working in Vues or any framework can feel restrictive sometimes. So if you share this feeling, please keep an open mind. For most sites, I can overcome these issues listed on the slide by just writing a few custom code plugins. And so let's consider our 90s movies website. I'm going to pop that up. Oh, and this collection on the right, by the way, I'm calling that Kool-Aid Man. And that's movies where a character breaks the fourth wall. Next up, let's look at some of the types of collections we want to create. And I'm going to get even weirder once we get into the real code examples. So a few examples. Action and adventure movies. That's movies where they are tagged with a genre of action and or a genre of adventure. So it's an or. Family comedies. That's just an and. As the category of family and the category of comedy. Happy days, or happy holidays. That's going to be using two different categories. The keyword, which is that sort of free tagging of holidays, but then I want to get rid of anything with the category of horror. And don't get me wrong, I personally think Gremlins is a great holiday movie, but I respect everyone's opinion. Now trending, an example of another field setting. So we're gonna do a sort this time. We have a popularity field, and all this data comes from the movie database. And we define trending as greater than a popularity of 8, and we sort them descending, so the most popular movies are first. Cult classics we'll define as movies that were panned by critics but have a high audience score. And box office bombs are movies that just hemorrhage money comparing their budget to their revenue. We're going to look at some more examples too when we get into the code. I imagine most folks who've used Vues can understand, even just with this pseudocode, how we're going to build something like this in Vues. And we're gonna see where we can push the limits. Oh, by the way, movie collection on the right, the common theme for me at least, it's called Too Old for This Shit, and it's movies where someone dies in a bathroom. Enough slides. Let's look at some code. So here is my site. I'm running it locally with Lando. I have only a couple of modules turned on. So this is Drupal core with the admin menu, just because I wanted it to drop down. I have the full toolbar, and I've enabled Kint for debugging. So we might use the debugger as we go. But otherwise, this is out of the box views. I did throw a jQuery slider on here, but it is a simple single JavaScript statement to turn a view into this carousel. So all my code's online. I want to look at actually at the views themselves. Here are some of the examples we talked about. So action and adventure. Let me just open that up in a new tab. I will zoom in a little bit. Hopefully make this clearer. If you're familiar with views, I apologize, but I'm going to go over the parts real quick. It's organized in these 3 panes, but actually quite a few pieces. And if you're not familiar with databases, that's quite all right. Like I said, I learned a lot through it. I'm going to throw Drupal lingo and some database lingo throughout this presentation, but really the heart of my talk is you can do anything, and it could be echoes and print statements that are extremely useful as Vues plugins. So in this example, we're looking at an unformatted list of content. So we're seeing teasers of the movies. That's what these things are, teasers. Thanks, Drupal. And filters. The filters are our where clauses in a SQL statement. Sort is our order by. And we have very few other things on here. So as we introduce new parts, I'll talk about them. Scrolling on down, I do have this debugger on. So we can see the SQL statement that this is generating. It's a bit to take in because we are joining off of 2 different columns. We're adding the genre field, and we're checking if, and it does it twice, we're checking if the genre is action and if the genre is not family. I didn't want the family movies to be in the action adventure one. And then it renders them out. This is what a teaser looks like in the admin theme, which is why it looks different from here, which is the rendered in my site theme. So that's the quick introduction to Vues. Some of the other ones I did, family comedy, we talked about. It's the exact same thing with different filters. Popular titles, we mentioned it was just a view that was sorted by popularity. Box office bombs. Ooh, that's one we're going to create in this version. SNL alum. My slider's all off. There we go. Had to refresh. So SNL alums is sorting by actors. We can show an example of that. That it requires 2 joins. And books, movies based on a book or a novel. This is just a keyword taxonomy term. Let's create a couple of new ones. Manage. Structure. Creating a new view. We'll add a new view. And once again, I'm probably over-explaining things to some of our audience members. But on the same note, I'm going to drop in some keywords that are extremely complicated. So all the code is in the repo, and I'm free for questions. Just know that what I'm actually doing as a demo is less important than sort of the experience and boilerplate we're going to look at. The CMS Philly will be just the name of the scratch pad we're using. One of the first things you have to select when building a view is this base table. And this is important because of the way entities are organized in Drupal. It's your main select statement that other content is going to be joined to. And we will have to sometimes join together. So if I want access to the user's data, I could create a user list, but I actually wanted movies. And one of the examples we'll do is movies that are on a user's watch list. Well, we're going to have to join those 2 together. So our base table is going to be content. I'll leave it as type all and unsorted for now, and let's just create this new view. For the sake of clarity in this presentation, I just want to start dumping things to the screen. And so I will create just a tabular interface and a couple other quick settings like a result summary so we can sort of track what's going on. So in the header, so I'm powering through this, but it's not directly related to the talk. Result summary, and I'm just going to accept the default features of pretty much all of these things. I'm going to change unformatted list to table, and I will increase the font size as well because I just realized this is tiny. Let's zoom in. One more. All right, so what we see now is a default list of movies. And for clarity, when Drupal creates a new view, it's going to leave the title label off. We'll put that back on. We see that the view itself has a list of movies. It's 10 with a pager. Actually, it's not. It's just a list of all of our content. So there's 22,000 records in here. That's movies, characters, and actors. It's all of our content type. The query here is let's select nodes. That's our content. There's our base table of node field data. That's the most useful table to pivot off of, where their status is 1. So where the nodes are published. Mapping that back up here, we see the title field where they are published. There's a reason you won't actually see this in the query statement, and it's because we're going to get that in the render. So it is a property of this node field data. We'll look a little closer in a minute. Let's add another field. So we have let's add a filter. I have too much content. I had 22,000 records. I'm only interested in movies. So I want to filter by content type, where the content type is one of movies. So one of is the operator and movies is the value. What we should see now in our views query is where it's published and where the type is in this list of, in this case, just movies. And now our results are down to 436 movies. So some great 90s classics in here. And that's looking pretty good. Let's add another value. How about the genre that the movie is in? Oops. This is a taxonomy term reference field where you can have one or more genres in this movie. So I'm going to leave the multiple field settings alone. That's going to add a comma separator between each one. Let's just click add. And so we should still have the same number of movies. We haven't changed that part of the query at all. 436 movies, but now we have the genres associated to each one. And you'll notice that the query itself hasn't changed. And that's significant. You think we're selecting new things and it hasn't changed. A lot of my talk today has this sort of background idea of query performance. That's good to know. Some of the changes we're going to make when we start looking at code are going to alter the query. Others are just going to alter what's rendered. And there's a big distinction and certainly a performance hit. If something is happening in the render and it could have been done in the query, it's usually quicker to do it in the query. So keep that in mind as we move forward. Let's add one more piece of data to this. So we have the title and the genre for each movie. There's a property of a movie from the movie database. I think it's called poster. Yeah, there it is. Poster path. This is actually the one we're going to make, so ignore that. That's my custom plugin. Poster path, though, is a field on the movies, and it's plain text. And it's not helpful. So this is a likely scenario. A business case for making custom plugins is when you have data and you want to show it differently. And there might be ways to do it. So I actually know that the way to make this an image is to alter this output just a little bit. I'm going to push this to a limit, and I'm going to kind of backtrack then. So let's start. I can rewrite this field with some custom text, and I'm going to use the existing fields as replacement patterns. So the poster path was that string of text, and I want to make an image out of it. I could create some HTML here. Source equals poster path. Oops, I need to add the templating render. And I have on a cheat sheet somewhere, here it is. I know from the movie database website that is our poster path prefix to get a width of 92, which is our thumbnail size. The other thing I want to do is I want to put the title of the movie underneath this, maybe in a div. Div class equals movie title. And there is a replacement string for title here. Okay, we're almost there, but let's say there's a movie that doesn't have a title or doesn't have artwork associated with it. Well, in that case, I'm going to use the no results field. This is already becoming a bit overwhelming, honestly. And I don't have a sample of this right now, so movie here. We would put our link to our fallback in here. So no results, and that gets rendered. I'll click apply, and we should see that this works. I mean, I have the link now appears and the title appears under it. I knew that adding that prefix of the source link would generate the box art, and that wasn't so bad. No custom plugins required, yet I wouldn't recommend it. What I've just done is nothing crazy. I've certainly seen some crazy views, but it is starting to become overwhelming. There's a few sins here. First, I'm storing HTML and CSS definitions in a views configuration. This buries that code for future. I'd much rather use an actual template as part of a display design system than to have this sort of set of views or set of configurations in a single view. This also means that if I want to change this, so maybe in this view, I wrote it one way, but in another view, I want the 500 width. I need to start creating different versions of this content to be used in different views. And when one thing changes, I have to track them down and update them in each one. And maybe even one of the most frustrating ones is right now we have the box art and the title for each one. But for design reasons, we're going to change the order so that the poster path, the poster appears as the first element in a table. And you'll notice that the title disappeared. And that has to do with the way views fields are rendered. This is back to my first point of views can feel a little restrictive. Now you're fighting the system. This poster path field doesn't know the title unless it appears after the title. And what someone may do is create another title field, hide that title field as a hidden title field above it. We only have a few fields on this view, and it's already feeling very polluted. And that's where I start to say, it's time to get out of this. Let's try a custom view plugin. Let's do it. I'm going to remove that one. It can't hurt us anymore. On to the code. I have a custom module. The module, because it has an info file. Here we go, for creating custom views for the movie site. One thing you will need is either in your .module, or I like for organization to have it in module name.views.inc. You will need a hook, an alter hook. I don't know if this is going away in future versions of Drupal. It's not something I love, but it is a way to inform Drupal that your plugins exist. So for each one of these plugins, we are adding a definition here. It's following the format of passing by reference to data, the name of the table that this is going off of. So node field data is our base table, and then the field that we're making this for. In this case, I'm making a whole new field. So if it's a new name, great. As long as it's a unique name, this is going to be our plugin ID. So it's called example plugin. The help text is, this is help text. And the ID is in this case, just the exact same name. You'll see that as I go down the list of the examples I'm going to show off, there's not a lot more here. So this is pretty uneventful. It's just a certain part of bookkeeping of making a views plugin happen. Where the plugins live are in a very particular data structure. And if you're new to backend Drupal development, this might seem overwhelming to remember these conventions, but it's important. So for views, it's going to be in the folder source, plugin, views, and for a field, it's going to be in field. Each one of these things we can look at has a different folder. These paths are not arbitrary. There is a plugin manager in the views module that is traversing all of our modules and looking for these folder paths to exist, and it's going to ingest the files inside and discover them. So in this case, example field plugin was the name in the previous file, and it has this prefix at views field. Now, if you're ever interested, you can see what other views fields exist in Drupal by just searching that, and you grep around and you'll see examples of the date field, the comment field, the forum field. You'll see different fields. It's acting real slow here. So, oh, here we go, node fields. So you can see what other folks have done with their plugins. But for us, we have ours called example field plugin, and it has two places. This is all boilerplate, and check out my repo. If you copy this and paste it, you can start your own module. You just have to make sure your namespace matches up with your module. And then you have a unique class name and a views field name. It has two methods that are important. There's actually a lot more that you can work with and we will play with before this session's out. If you want to look at field plugin base, you can see the methods that we're extending. The two that we're overriding are query. Now, query is required by the views plugin interface, but I don't actually want to change the query in this example. I'm just giving an example message. It's just static text. So I don't want to change the query. There's no reason to mess with it. It would mess up performance. I just want to know that when someone uses this example plugin, it returns example message. And that's it. So that's our whole plugin. There's a query method and a render method. Well, it's our whole plugin yet. We'll get there. If I look at example field plugin, we'll add that to the view. There's our help text that was defined. I'm going to just leave the default settings. And we see example message down the whole row. Okay, not super useful. Let's see if we can have a little more fun with it. In the render method, we have this values. Values is all the data that's available in the render object this time. So using a dump, let's get, I actually already know that inside values, there is an entity object. And that is, in this case, the base node entity. So let's just dump that to the screen and see what happens. Oh, because this updates with Ajax, you're going to need a debugger like DPM, or alternatively, I would use some more sophisticated xdebug type thing. Okay, well, that's slow. Give that a moment. There we go. This is the fully qualified node object. So anything you can do with a node, you can do right now. And in our case, instead of returning an example message, I want to return that value of that poster path field. So I'm going to return this entity get field path to string. If you're unfamiliar with this, this is just interacting with node objects. The bottom of the list, update preview. Did I mess it up? Messed it up. This is where it's nice when we're in a real setting and someone could tell me what I did wrong. It might be called something else. Luckily, I'm just going to go right to the answer because I've already built this one. It is called field poster path. I'm looking to see if anyone's raising their hand. They saw my mistake. Is it not toString? Get string. There we go. All right, there's our string. We're back to a starting point. With that wasn't enough. We're going to want to prefix it with that URL I had mentioned before. I'm just going to copy this work over though, because time is of the essence in this presentation. So we're going to prefix it with the URL on the movie database. And the size, I think, well, I don't remember the size, so we're just going to go with 500 because I know that's a valid size. Hit update, and we should now see an image object is using an image template to render live demo because path isn't defined. This is why I never do live demos and presentations. Makes me nervous. I guess there's something to be learned for debugging things together. And I just need the name of that field one last time. Field under poster under path. Okay. Sorry. I'm copying from a final product and I had cleaned it up a lot. So we may just look at that one from now on. Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to copy the whole method. That way I know it's right. And we'll just walk through it. Drum roll, please. Darn, I'm messing something up. Let's look at the logs. I may end up just skipping through this so I can get to a more interesting example. Oh, am I missing a? I sure am. Thanks for bearing with me, crew. Now we have some images. That image is too big. And so the last thing I wanted to show off is, so in this case, we're just calling a render method. We've done nothing to alter the query, but we are doing some work. We have access to the node object. And for my extended example, I'm doing some checking like, does this node have that field? And is that field empty? And if not, don't return anything. I do have this thing called size. And in that case, I'm going to switch over to my final product here just for the sake of time. I have two more methods I wanted to override. So I said field plugin base has some methods we can override. The one is to define options. This is for default options. And options build form. This is how we use those options. So for use of the form API, it's returning a element on a form where I say it's a select list with this title and description. It has a default value specified above. You can copy this markup and create any sort of settings you want. But for me, I have a select list that has two options. W92 is our thumbnail. W500 is our box. Everything else is the exact same that we just looked at, except it's working. So let me remove this field and try the final version. And I can at least show you what that looks like when we have those two other methods highlighted. And then we'll try a more fun filter. Movie poster. What happens here, since we've overridden that method, I get this new thing called thumbnail or image size, and it's defaulted to the thumbnail and has this description. You will notice that it's the same thing we wrote here. So image size, thumbnail description. We now have a setting available, and I want to change it to the box, which is the W90 something. And we see that this is coming in as a box size. If I scroll down here, I just changed it from being a hard-coded string to now we're doing size equals this options. So accessing this options will give you anything from an option that you add to the options form. I think that this field, views field plugin is a good starting place for any fields that you want to alter. In this case, it's just with a render array. Something more interesting. Actually, I got a couple of more ones I want to just kind of go through here. So we looked at the poster image. Let's look at one that's an even complicated render array, but it's still just a render. And this is called Actors Shortlist. So in this one, I'm not doing a query yet. In fact, I probably could do a subquery, but it would just get overwhelming for this demo. So instead is when I'm rendering the row, I want to create a list of actors in this movie. Now that shouldn't seem like a hard thing to do. In fact, you could do it with Drupal in that we can use relationships and say that, okay, well, a movie has a relationship to a credit, a cast member, and the cast credit has a relationship to a person. But adding both of those relationships, we would see that this views pager of 436 movies would become tens of thousands of records because it starts to look at unique instances of how these joins come together. And there are modules to overcome this. I've seen folks do alter hooks where they start to aggregate views results. That often becomes very fragile. Instead, I want to add a brand new field, just like when I had my hello field or hello world field or whatever it was that was just plain text, except I'm going to put my own code there. So in this example of views plugin, once again, let's close the example. Once again, I'm leaving the query alone. And instead, I have a render method. I've broken things out, so it's very verbose, but this could just be a few lines of code. As you know, in views, in the value, we have access to the entity. So we have the node. Let's check if that node has a field called credit. And if it does, there's a Drupal method called getReferenceEntities. So this grabs all the credit nodes, doing the join for us. And then for all of those credit nodes, I'm using an array map. I say, look at the person field and get the reference entities. So what we're doing is we're loading in each person that's related to this movie. And finally, I'm array slicing. I'm not doing it for all of them. I'm just looking at the top 3 billed people per movie. So this is nothing particular about this talk other than anything you do in Drupal, you can do in this render method. And if you return it as a renderable item, so string, a template, or some other render object, it will now appear in your view. So in my example, I got the top 3 actors. I have their names, but I'm going to count them. So I know that there are 3. Well, I know there's 3 actors. I'm going to count all the rest and take away 3. So if there's 23 people on this movie, others is selected to 20. And I have this sort of suffix called others is the number of actors, more, ... What I'm returning is imploding the names array. So this is the name of the actors, comma, separating each one, and then that suffix. I know I went very fast on that, but it's not really relevant to the views plugin. I just wanted to show an example of it, and you could digest it and pick it apart later. Let's look at what it looks like. Actors shortlist. What I like about this example, so we get to see Ralph Macchio, ... plus 52 more. What I like about this example is this is a very practical reason to use views. I want access to a subset of data in a formatted way. I want something that I can manipulate, but the views interface would not let me do it out of the box. It's 2 joins away. It's a lot of superfluous squashing of unique and non-distinct items to get us to just this count. And I know how to do this in other Drupal ways. So I loaded it and I returned it. All I needed was a node ID or a node object to get started. That's pretty great for render arrays, but it might be nice to look at what we could do by actually changing a query. Let me delete a few of these because the interface is getting a little overwhelming. And an example I have of messing with a query is calculating a movie's profit. So in this case, and I have the full query listed here for review, check it out on GitHub. I am going to change the query. And I'm loading it just as query right now, but you will have access to the query in this query. This is everything that views has done for the query up to the point where this is being added. This field is being added. I have access to the bait table. It's where data, but in the future, later, we could use others. And I'm using a join manager just to make the code a little more brief. But if you need to know how to use a SQL join in Drupal, there's plenty of documentation online for that. So I'm saying join my node data on my movie revenue, and we're going to call it revenue. That's our relationship. Join my budget data on the node, and let's call it budget. And what we've done here is actually the exact same thing you can do if you created relationships here to those two fields. So in a lot of ways, this is superfluous, but I just want to show an example of using a join handler inside one of these to alter a query. So we have two new things joined on. We have our node data plus our revenue data and our budget data. Of course, to access them, you need to have a field. So we're adding a field, and it's called revenue. And we're adding a field, and it's called budget. I could just call it budget, but actually there may already be a field in this view. So thinking of the future, there may be a field called budget. And what's nice is when you add a relationship, regardless what you name it, it's going to return its alias. So my budget 1, budget 2, budget 3, it will do that math for us. So it's in a substitute instead of calling it budget, it's called the budget alias. So this is the name of the field, and this is the name of the table and the field on that table. So I've added two new fields to my view, one for revenue, one for budget. I want to do a little extra math here because some of these movies are incomplete. They have zeros listed, and I'm sure they didn't have a zero budget, and they probably didn't have a zero revenue. So I'm just filtering those away. This is another Drupal standard, adding a where clause. It's group, the field itself, the value, and the condition. So the group is just the standard default group, and we're saying where the budget does not equal 0, and the revenue does not equal 0. And finally, we're going to add it to this view. So here where we added some fields to the query. We're going to add another field to the query, but we're only going to access one of them later on in the render. So we're adding a field called profit. And this profit is going to use a formula. The formula is this thing above. The formula is revenue minus budget. So if this number is negative, we know you didn't do too well. Add field actually has some interesting documentation on the subject. Normally add field doesn't have this first parameter null, but if you treat it as null, then you get to use it as a formula, which is a nice handy thing. I also prefixed it with a $sign and made it look nice. Let's take a peek. Add a field. And what we're going to see too is, for the first time actually in a while, we're going to see the query change. So custom profit calculation. We'll leave the default options, but you have access to them. You also have access to override any of these if you'd like. So just like we did with the custom setting, you have access to every part of this form. And we can see some dollar amounts. Okay, GoldenEye did all right. Crybaby, not so much. That's just kind of fun. We get to now generate whatever we'd like. If we add a field in the query, this is the only real important line, not everything above it. But if we add a field in the query, we can get access to it as a value. And you can do whatever you want. Add a field, which is the title, but with a year of the movie at the end appended to it. And then we want to do that down here. Everything else is just fun examples. But there you go. That is your boilerplate, I think, for fields. They are all going to have some sort of an ID, and they're going to have this query and this. Actually, you don't need the render, but you do if you want anything to show. So the query and the render method. Feel free to go nuts with those. I have some other examples online, but I want to move on to a couple other plugins before I run out of time. So an example of, oh, and I did say I wanted to show the query before we left here. Everything that we just did appears now in this query. We're left joining on revenue, left joining on budget, and there's our where clause, making sure the values aren't empty, and we're finally adding that one field called profit, which is defined as the sum of those. If you're used to using MySQL, this makes a lot of sense to you. This is database agnostic, so it doesn't actually have to be SQL. These add field, add where will work with whatever your system is, including external sources, JSON feeds. I've done Apache Solr work with custom views. It's a lot of fun. You can copy this, paste it into something like MySQL Workbench, and really start to optimize the query. You just need to change the aliases on some of these where these brackets are. That's probably not going to work in your GUI. All right. I do have quite a few others. I'm just going to quick show off one, but we probably won't walk through it, just to show you that it's popular or possible there was this one called My List. And in this example, I wanted to just add an expression. And so Vue's query interface does not allow expressions in all of its parts of the query management system. You can do it though if you add an expression through a subquery. So you can add a subquery to a view, and in this subquery it has an expression. This is a little bit more processor intensive. If you're interested, you can always look at the Vue's build and execution times. So because I'm creating a whole new query with inside, it does have a little more load time, but it's still pretty performant. And since most of my sites are cached, I employ this trick a lot. So I added an expression. The expression could have been anything, but for me, I said, let's select all the movies on a user's list. And then we're going to compare that list against the current list of movies. So we join them together, and I create a new field called My List. The most important thing to note, though, is just that you can incorporate a subquery in here. And what it was going to do is, and I like to show it off at least. That way, when you're, spending this evening looking at my code for fun, you'll have a baseline of what you're looking for. What's nice about this example too is I am loading some external styles. I've created a little plus sign. I'm using font awesome. So this user doesn't have anything on their list. Actually, they do, but I think I have to sort by newest or something like that to see any of them. And it's just not worth time to look at. What I can show you though is down in the render. In the render method, I'm returning a custom theme. So I have a template called button. If you're used to Drupal theming, you've created a template before, great. Send it to the theme, pass properties to it. I'm pulling, in this case, the property is the current user authenticated. And if they're authenticated, great, we're going to show them if something's on their list. And if it's on their list, there's the field we created above. The field's called on my list. We can access it on my list. That's the real value to today's presentation. So add a field up here, access it down here. Can be whatever you want. And the reason I did this is I wanted an example of where someone can add a favorite to their list and see if it's on their list. But if you're not logged in, then this becomes a login button. And this is very much now we're pushing the boundaries of what views could ever do without some really messy overrides. So render your own custom themes right here. Let's see, what else can I get to before I run out of time? Let's look at a filter. I do have an example filter. Filters are going to look very similar. It just has a query method. So actually, it's extremely similar. It is in now a field called Source Plugins Views Filter. That's where we add our filters. Change the namespaces to match. And we're going to use this @views filter. And so this one's just called example filter plugin. For me, I'm not doing anything at the moment. This is just this query method, but I do have an example that's complete. So let's grab it. Here's my complete. It's one line of code. I'm just adding a where clause. We actually already did a where clause in our fields, but wheres are pretty much what a filter is all about. You can do other logic in there, but you almost expect. So in my SQL parlance, this is us getting a filtered list. Group is, I like to use this whenever possible. Very rarely am I specifying what group. That is if a person editing your view starts to do those and or conditionals. They might have groups of filters. So it's in your best interest to leave that alone. The name of the field, the value, and the condition. So I am looking for movies where the title contains an exclamation mark. And that's the whole filter. There we go. There's a view filter. And I think I called it excited. I already forgot what it was called. Oh man. Well, anyhow, I'm not going to fight with it because there's more fun things to look at. This is a filter I just called excited movies. Movies that have a title, exclamation mark in the title, like Stop or My Mom Will Shoot. Classic movie. Yeah, not a high earner, believe it or not. I find most of the custom work I do with views are in the fields or the filters. In my repo, I included this joins, but in retrospect, I kind of wish I would have removed it. Most of the time, I will do joins within the fields and the filters themselves. Likewise, I included a pretty superfluous example. Oh, these are being unused now. Of a of a relationship. And I even note, like, this is unnecessary because Views is automatically creating relationships for all your fields. Relationships are more useful when you have custom entities or one-off tables and you want to bring that content in and join it up against your node or whatever you're comparing it to. So this is an example of just a relationship of taking that revenue field and joining it on the node table. I have very few cases where I use this in entities. And finally, sorts. So I have an example of a sort as well. Here's your boilerplate you can use. Once again, the namespace has changed. It's in a folder called sort. And instead of views filter or views field, it's at views sort with a unique name. Sort also has a query method you have to override. I didn't mention this before, but ensure my table is a nice little cleanup routine that just in this case makes sure we have access to the node data. And we have the ability to modify this query however we want. And I have an example in here right now. So let's add order by, oh, it's not. Order by the name of the field, the value, and the condition. I do have an example though. This is everything we did before with calculating movie profits. In this case, I didn't use, just so you have a more complete picture, I wrote out the joins rather than using a join handler. So here's how you can write a join if you're curious. But all the way down, the important part is we started to add these fields. And so I want to order by, before I was displaying the formula, so I was adding a field with that formula. Here I am ordering by the formula. And that's it. Just this one line is really the core of what happens in a sort handler. Add your own order by, and you need these pieces of information. I'm using a formula, so it's a little different since this first parameter is null. The other thing I wanted to show off though was that you have the ability to override any parts of that interface. Before we had one for image size, but now I have one for an order dialog box. So scrolling back up, I can see sort orders ascending versus descending, and it's hemorrhaged money versus, you know, it wasn't the worst of the worst. And let me try adding a sort. And this is the last one that I'm going to have time to show off at the moment, but I am free for questions and I can go through any of these slower or even after this. So there is our sort order. We can decide if it's ascending or descending and provide more contextual language. So when a site owner says, hey, I need to be able to sort my view a certain way, you've empowered them to actually know what the heck they're doing. Ascending and descending is very confusing, especially for things like dates. And we can see our biggest flops. The Postman, I remember that one. Spear, I like Spear. There's some good movies. I don't know why these lost money. Super Mario Brothers is a great movie. All right, that's about all I have time to show off at the moment. So back onto the deck, just to sort of finish up. There is a difficulty in letting more people make views, and what I think you need to do in your organizations is start talking about, if I'm going to let folks who are our power users start making views, you might need to create more permissions and roles, you know, a views maintainer role that folks have to go through a training program to prove that they're ready to be a part of. There's probably going to be a feature request process. Unless you're on a small site, I encourage folks to say, before creating a view, we need to talk about each one. Make a standard form for it though, so you're not the bottleneck. It's just a process of reviewing all changes as they're coming in and then reviewing them before they go live. I do this often with having folks make their own web forms. I'm fine with it, but on certain sites, we still need to have oversight so they're not asking for social security numbers or other personally identifiable information. So I want you to make your forms, but yes, there is an advisory board. On the technical side of things, there's a few things to consider as far as dev workflows go. Views is saved as configuration. And now there's a few ways you can keep your website's code healthy. One is for a small team with a lot of autonomy. You can just do this directly on production, and I have friends and family sites where they can change their views, and I routinely export the configuration and check it into the repo. Another way is using config ignore, and that's the one I use for web forms all the time, where you can say ignore all views, or maybe ignore all views prefixed with this content _ title. What's nice about this is you've given them the ability to change some views. They're no longer tracked in version control, but you've limited the number of things they can change. The most robust is to have, and I do this with a university right now, have a separate staging server for your content, which is a mirror of production. It's behind a private IP, and we let folks create their own views, modify their content types. We export those changes, check them in the repo, all with a Drush script and some bash scripts. And then GitHub runs, makes a merge request automatically, and it can get merged into production once it's approved. It actually wasn't that much work. The hard part was, keeping a second production site up and running. So if you're not comfortable with them working directly on production, maybe there's a mirror of production. Oh, and for the record, this set of movies was called Rocky's Horrible Picture Show, and it's Sylvester Stallone movies with 2 stars or less. And this one was called Droid Rage, and that's movies. All right, last, I just want to leave you with this settlement. I hope you can empower this. The idea of a site builder keeps expanding, and as folks' technical literacy is increasing, we don't want to be bottlenecks for them. So find ways to alter your processes. Creating things like a custom views plugin lets them use views without having with the technical things. That's up to you. Thank you, and I'm here to answer any questions. I know I just took up the full amount of time, but it's the end of the day, so as long as you have some energy, I do as well. And I just need to figure out how to change these controls. All right, microphones are on. Any questions? I'm ready.
Thanks, Jim.
Oh, thank you. I know it was a lot of content, and I wish I could have gotten more nitty gritty. So it takes off at some point.
Sorry, I have a question. Do you have these examples anywhere, maybe on GitHub? Or...
Oh, yes. So everything is in this repo right here, github.com ngem/movies. And this is, I am ngem on all of the social platforms and GitHub. So Drupal, feel free to reach out if you have any questions, but they're all there. Most importantly, almost all my examples had nothing to do with the presentation. It was just a few lines that say, change the query, change the render, change the define options. What I'm actually doing in there, though, is just specific to my movie site. So you have fun, do your own query, and let me know if you see anything that seems weird. I'll gladly walk you through it. All right, well, thank you all again. It really is a pleasure speaking to everyone. This has been a fun conference, and I wish I could have seen more. So there was a lot of good sessions going on at the same time. I'm excited to go back and look at things when they're available. I'll post my slide deck right now, and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Have a great day.